I don't know what that means.
Oh, start video.
Start video.
Yep, it's recording now, it said. Is that what you wanted, Patricia?
Yep, I did. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget. So it's like, I don't mind the first few minutes.
Great.
I'm going to go back.
Okay, my camera's not plugged in.
Oh, I left my water where I can't reach it. One sec.
Okay. Stop just a minute. Wes?
Well,
Yeah,
did you click on when it said this video is being recorded? Did you click on continue?
I'm on, honey. I just was trying to get my camera set up here.
Well, you have to click on continue if it tells you this video is being recorded. I'm going to go back in there now.
I did.
Okay.
We now see you, Les.
Hi, I'm Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
How are you doing?
We're doing good.
I just want to tell you I have to leave at 1:45, so I'm not just running off.
That's fine. No problem. We know people drop in as they can, so we appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this.
And I see Miss Mary Ricketson here. How are you, Mary?
I'm here. Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you. And again, thank you for joining us as well. We see Mr. Chris. How are you?
Hello, good day. Looking forward to this.
Thank you for joining us, our resident baritone. I appreciate everyone showing up. Just we are going to take a minute or two just to make sure that as many people show up as they can. And we do understand folks will be joining us and folks may have to depart, and that's okay too. It's poetry in the afternoon.
As we're getting set up, I want to take a moment to see how my sound is. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect, thank you. Sometimes the sound is not great and I have to adjust the settings. Thanks.
And I know, Joyce, we heard you well. Bart, your audio was good.
Okay.
And I see Hilda and Aurora and Chris, and I think that's Tim. So we've got a lot of folks here today. And again, we really appreciate any of the support we get for our poets. It's always a good day. Let's see. Oh. Robert, man of the hour. Hey, Kyra, just a comment I see in the chat group. You might want to see if you can turn up your audio just a little bit, if you can.
That's what I was wondering. Let me see if I can get the settings any better.
Thanks, Joan.
This room's a little echoey, so I have to account for that. So we're going to see what I can do.
I'm trying to figure out what that is behind you, Kyra. Is that a poster or a painting? Is that a...
It's a backdrop.
Very cool. Like it.
The backdrop, it was supposed to be for photographs that a friend had at a party. And I said, wow, it looks so much nicer than what I usually have in the room.
Yeah, I hear you.
Just adding a little magic to the day, you know.
It is. I like the fairy dust. Well, you know what? It is 12:02. I want to honor everyone's time. So at this time, I would like to go ahead and let's see if we can get this little PowerPoint thingy to work kind of in the background. We'll use it sometimes and not all the times, and I'm sure I'll mess it up a little bit, but that's okay. I want to welcome everyone that's here. And we do realize folks will come and go, and that's okay. My name is Patty Thompson. I work with Redhawk Publications. I'm the project coordinator. And it's always a treat for us when we start to have our books get launched, especially poetry, to have our poets kind of come in, talk a little bit. It's a very informal, casual discussion and poetry reading with the new books that are coming out. And we're pleased that Redhawk can do that. I always like to, we will do a proper introduction of our three poets, Bart, Joyce, and Kyra. But before we do that, I do want to see if, I can get this to work. Just a little bit about Redhawk Publications before we do our introductions. We are a division of Catawba Valley Community College, which makes us pretty unique. We are the only community college in the state, and there's 58, that actually has a publishing press and published works. And that is kind of unique in that when I took the job, I made a point of Googling, well, who are the other community colleges that do publishing? And clearly there were no other in the state of North Carolina. I even looked in nationally, all 50 states. I could not find another community college in the country that offers a publishing press. That's not to say it doesn't exist, but it does show you that we are kind of a unique unicorn, if you will. We are different. And our primary mission is to really bring to the market words, voice, art that never would never make it to market. We fill a unique niche between traditional publishing, if you will, and of course the vanity press that tends to ask for money from writers. We're different. And so again, we always like to let folks know, we do look for submissions. I will share this. We are closed for 2021 with peace and love. We're not going to be able to accept any more manuscripts, at least until October or November, just because our pipeline is filled and we want to give good service and good work to the good words that we have. So if you have something, and we've spoken already, you're probably grandfathered. If you're new to the game and you would like to consider publishing with us, again, I'd probably wait until maybe October, November, or December. You can submit it now, and we have a lovely electronic folder that's holding them until it's time for us to kind of take that leap into our next 2021 submissions. But I would like to go ahead and introduce our three authors, our unique poets that are going to be doing a brief, some discussion, informal discussion and readings today. We are very excited to announce that Bart is with us. Bart Solarczyk. Oh, am I pronouncing that right, Bart?
Solarczyk.
Man, I was so close. Thank you.
It's close. You're good.
Bart is a retired social service counselor who lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he was born and properly raised. He has one cat, one dog, and one daughter. Over the past 4 decades, his poems have been published in print and online in a variety of magazines, journals, broadsides, and anthologies. He is the author of 9 poetry chapbooks and the full-length collection titled World.
Tilted.
Tilted World.
Tilted World.
Tilted Worlds, my apologies, which is with Low Ghost Press in 2019. And of course, Redhawk Publications is proud to publish his personal curated poems from over the years in his aptly entitled collection, Classic Chapbooks. That came out this summer. So again, we're blessed to have Bart with us today. And we're also honored to have Joyce Compton Brown. Joyce is a Pushcart nominee and author of 2 chapbooks, and Singing, and with Jared Edges, and that was with Main Street Rag. Joyce attended Appalachian State University, where she met and married the illustrious Les Brown, who's also published with us, whose Blue Ridge origins sealed her love of Appalachian landscape, culture, literature, and especially roots music. She received her doctorate at the University of Southern Mississippi, taught at Gardner-Webb University, with occasional summer forays into workshops in poetry and Appalachian studies. Nature, her small town family, childhood, and music inform her poetry. She also enjoys dabbling in art and creative nonfiction. And Redhawk Publications is proud to announce her collection, Standing on the Outcrop, which will be released on September 1st. And finally, we are pleased to announce that Kyra Freeman, the 2021 Adventure Bound Books Poetry Contest winner, is the author of another newly released Redhawk Publications Second Life Poems of Reemerging. And that just came again out this summer in 2021. She has published poetry in Asheville Storytelling Circle's newsletter, and her personal stories have been featured on 88.7 WNCW's Word Stage. Her poetry is steeped in the small moments of everyday experience and draws inspiration from nature in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in Vermont, as well as in North Carolina. In addition to her poetry and photography, Kyra spends her free time telling stories, writing silly songs, reading voraciously, dancing in the kitchen, and going outside in the yard as much as possible. And Kyra lives in Morganton with her husband, daughters, cat, and a dog. So those are our illustrious poets that we're going to be talking with today and hearing their poetry. If you are not muted and you're not one of our featured poets, you may want to mute, just because sometimes I hear a little noise in the background, and I don't want that to disturb any of our speakers today. Thank you. And you know what? I normally like to kind of start with a few questions that kind of deal with some of the background and inspiration for their poetry over the years. So I'm going to ask, and this will be kind of round robin style. And Bart, you're to my left, so I'm going to start first with you. And I will ask some and all of the questions to Kyra and Joyce as well. But Bart, can you tell us what inspired you to take up poetry? Was that something that you've always done? Did you come from a literary family? What's your background with writing poetry?
Well, I mean, you know, my parents were very blue collar. We were on the south side of Pittsburgh, which was a heavy industry back then. But my mother always read to us. We always had books around the house. So I think that a love of reading, it was very important. And I went to Catholic school where we were encouraged to read quite a bit. And I actually started writing poetry like in elementary school. I kind of enjoyed it. And then as I got into junior high and got exposed more to like Edgar Allan Poe was probably the first poet that really captured me, you know, as an adolescent. And so just kind of went through that. You know, I just started early, and I did stop writing for a while, and then kind of you know, when I was out of college, I started writing again at some point, and then just took off.
Okay, and that's kind of interesting because you mentioned south of Pittsburgh, as I'm not as familiar with the south side of Pittsburgh. Is that an area that's known for illustrious writers, or?
Well, actually, right now, Pittsburgh, kind of funny, for not being a really huge city, has an oversized, I think, literary scene. There's a lot of poetry and such now. So I do think there were more people writing back then than maybe I realized. Like I said, it was kind of rough and tumble, very blue collar. But back in the early 80s, there was a magazine, a local paper started called the Millhunk Herald. And it was all workers writing. It was people who worked in the mills, and it lasted for 10 years. They have an anthology out that you can still find. It's called Overtime, Punching Out with the Millhunk Herald. But it's a big, thick anthology, but it was very, very interesting. I mean, Studs Terkel praised it. There was a few people that got, you know, with the little name writers that got involved with it. But
That sounds interesting. And I'm going to ask Joyce to kind of step on next, because funny you should mention the idea of workers writing poetry. That has a lot to do with what Joyce has been writing. Joyce, you're still muted, so I want to make sure that you kind of flip that switch so that we can hear you. But if you don't mind sharing with us, Joyce, what has been the inspiration for your writing over the years?
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing. Did you ask me to speak to the workers' rights issue?
No, no. What inspired you? What's
Okay.
been an
Sure,
inspiration
thank
for
you.
you to write
Thank you.
poetry?
But I do appreciate that Bart and I have in common this interest in blue collar families and blue collar workers. My sister got us out of poverty by going to work at the short mill as soon as she graduated, our father having died some years before. But what inspired me, I think, in this little town of Troutman, which was certainly isolated, but my mother was just a reader. She read to me. She read herself. She knew that education was the key to her children's future, and she instilled in me that love of reading. I never went to my class without knowing how to spell every word for the next spelling bee. And a wonderful teacher. Isn't that true? How many of us have teachers? When Miss Ruth Clark read The Creation and that power of James Weldon Johnson's words, I knew I loved poetry, and I didn't understand why everybody else in the class wasn't just gasping with joy. But I didn't really start writing until much later. In college, I was an English major. I gave it a try and at least had the good sense to know how bad my early stuff was. So I quit for a long time. And then, of course, I think people who love poetry and love writing are inevitably going to try it for themselves. Took me forever. I was from the old days where you sent something off in a sealed envelope and made copies and everything. Shouldn't have type of, you were working at best a Solarczyk. So I think the combination of the computer helped me to really become far more prolific after retirement.
Interesting. And I'd like for Kyra to jump in as well, because Kyra is our ingenue, if you will. She's relatively new in terms of being published. This is her first published book of collection of poems, but you've been writing for a while. So can you tell us a little bit about what your background has been and your inspiration for writing, if it was something you've always done?
So I grew up in a small town of Vermont with very young parents who decided to move back to the land without knowing really how to do any land type things. And so the inspiration from nature is huge. My mother read to me, and my grandparents used to play silly word games with me. Stink pink, and then you had to find that meant, and then you have a clue, and you have to say, okay, it's got one syllable, and these two words rhyme, things like that. Mm-hmm. But when I was in the 6th grade, we memorized poetry. And some of that Robert Frost poetry, I remember Ozymandias even, we read all kinds of poems we memorized, and Shel Silverstein. And that really made me adore poetry. A high school English teacher plucked me out of freshman English and said, you need to be in the literary magazine, even though I wasn't writing my own work at that time. And so I started. And I went to the New England Young Writers Conference, which is still happening today. And I had a poetry workshop with the poet Ruth Stone. I had gone to that for short stories. But then when I met Ruth Stone, I just loved her work. I loved what she had to say about writing. And then I put writing away and didn't think of myself as a writer for many years. But I was secretly writing all the time. I didn't keep any of my work. Most of it was done live in front of students as a school librarian. And I just loved the poetry units. When teachers were like, I don't want to do poetry, I'd be like, can I come in your classroom or bring them to the library? We're doing poetry. And I didn't think of myself as a poet until probably about 2010. I just wrote things on the back of grocery lists. And I did a lot of the Poetry Machine is an online platform that I taught my students how to use that is kind of like Mad Libs, and it forces you to, or inspires you to, try a bunch of different forms for poetry. So I wrote all different kinds of poems again, and they're all basically attached to my lesson plans.
Mm-hmm. That's fun. I'll tell you what we're going to do now, and this is going to be more of a lightning round because I don't want to take away from your ability to read your poems, but I really would like to know who have been some of the poets that have shaped your writing and or have inspired you, your favorite poets, if you will. And we're going to start with Bart, Joyce, and Kyra. So Bart, you're first. Who have you maybe molded yourself after or inspired you the most as a poet?
I don't know if I've molded myself after anyone. I guess there's been some influence, but I think there's, I mean, in terms of a lot of my short work, probably like a Basho and Lipo, but also a poet that came out of Pittsburgh, later located in Northampton, Massachusetts, with Jack Gilbert. He's a very powerful poet. I liked a lot of James Tate's early work, like The Lost Pilot, and also Jim Harrison, who's written a lot of novels. To me was a top-notch poet. So he's one of my all-time favorites. And I have read, of course, my share of Bukowski, a lot of it. But I always found that there's too many cheap Bukowski imitators out there. And a kid that drinks a 6-pack and then goes and throws up and writes a poem about it and thinks he's Charles Bukowski. So I think that's a real underappreciation of what he did. But I've really intentionally not really tried to model myself after anybody. I've hoped I could develop my own style.
Good for you. And how about you, Joyce?
Oh, well, I taught for so many years and I was grounded in the modernist. Now, I can't ever say that I modeled myself. Whoa. Yeah. I can't ever say that I modeled myself after Wallace Stevens, but I do love the man. Well, not personally, but his powerful poetry. I love the modernists. I love William Carlos Williams. I love that chauvinist pig, William Butler Yeats, just the old masters. But I found that wasn't really what I was capable of. And it wasn't even where my heart went. But so in terms of more modern people, I do love some of the more readily approachable. Of the older ones, Elizabeth Bishop was really an inspiration to me, and then today I like Ellen Bass a whole lot, and even some of my especially some of my regional poets that I've come to know through participation in events like this. I won't name names because I would leave out somebody whose poetry I really love, but there's so much wonderful poetry that gets buried in the massive production. So it's easy to overlook. I have to mention one other. I'm sorry. I have to just mention Mary Oliver. Everybody loves Mary Oliver, but oh, what a woman, what a loss. That's it. I'm sorry.
And thank you for bringing that up about Mary Wallace. Kyra, how about yourself?
For many years having taught, I like a lot of children's poets. But the person who probably influenced me to think of myself as a poet the most is George Ella Lyons. I did an exercise with students with the Where I'm From poem, and then that's what made me actually write my own stuff down.
Interesting.
I have many I could mention, but I want to get to the poetry.
Me too. And that's what's next. So before people start going in the chat, poetry, let's go ahead and have that start. And Kyra, we're going to start with you. We're going to change things up a little bit. We are going to ask our poets to select a poem. And, the theme is, maybe an earlier poem that you may have written during your first few years of writing, but, we're flexible. But Kyra, would you mind reading something from your collection?
Actually, what I want to read is about what inspires me or how my poems are, and it's not from my collection. I'm breaking all the rules.
And that's fine. No, there's no rules. It's poetry.
Little spills. My poems are messy, emerging out of nowhere, oozing, dripping, leaving tracks like hot tears or cold sweats or blood from cracked winter skin. I mop them up as best I can, before showing them to the world. That was like from a couple weeks ago I wrote.
And do you have another one you'd like to read?
Oh, I have. So the other one I want to read is called Second Life, and it is the title of my book comes from this. Second Life. Veil off, eyes open. I chose this partner. I choose this dance. Love is more powerful than fear. With all of his brilliance, his impulsiveness, his baggage, his insight, his fallibility, his courage, his humanness, his facility with metaphor, his insistence on truth, I chose this partner. When I can't see, when he won't see, when he can't talk, when he won't let me try to help, the pattern spirals on repeat. Our ghosts dance with each other, twisting, writhing, tethered, they drag our living selves over the shards of the past, which try to embed themselves into our naked feet. My feet, having shed my boots, those beautiful, expensive, ill-fitting boots with the lifetime warranty that seemed like they should have been all the rage in Paris. Over the years, I got so used to limping that it became part of my personal choreography. My feet ache to learn a new dance. My feet, having shed not only my boots, but also my old skin, feel those shards press painfully into the newly exposed soles. Step, 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 sway. We dance, moving again to our own tune, the rhythm of right now. Our hands reach for each other and hold tight. Veil off, eyes open. I chose this dance. I choose this partner. Love is more powerful than fear.
Thank you. I remember reading that in a park, and it made me a little teary. It's wonderful. Moving on, Joyce, if you don't mind, why don't you honor us being our second person to do it?
It's my honor, of course. And my early poems, when I didn't consider myself a poet, were mainly in our little in-house publication at Gardner Webb. It wasn't till a colleague said at my retirement dinner that I was a poet. I've even thought that I was. But here is an old poem published in one of my little books here. And Boiling Springs, Cleveland County was a rural culture, and we often said that we joked with friends about each event, whether it's a Gardner Webb concert or a tractor pull, has its own ambiance. And so we chose to go to a tractor pull, and this is called Tractor Pull Ambiance. Go ahead and fly till you found out who you are. Billy Dean, somewhere in my broken heart. Oh, when the black diesel cloud above Bobby Joe Denton's beloved Deuce's wild modified stock tractor sprouted, roiled, and trailed dark soot into the gray streaked sky. And when Frank Brawley moved the massive skull flag sled with a mighty heave of his Carolinian unlimited class truck, and the headers on his Allison engine shot cool alcohol flames into the dusk rose night. And the green John Deere silently smoothed the glowing red clay track, while Billy Dean blessed 2,000 souls at peace on a sloping lawn with his hope that they might find what they longed for. And the white moon pierced the smoky night and glimmered again from the perfect mirror of the oval lake, while sweet young girls twined glowing blue and green halos in their hair so that blue jean boys might ache. And children flung neon golden lights into the gloom and did not cry in their darkness, while the country twang of Billy's cried out for what was lost somewhere in his broken heart. So that sleepy-eyed boys and babies and men with calloused hands and new mothers in grass-stained lawn chairs and burnt-faced drivers of big trucks might hear and be comforted. And you and I ate our ketchup fries and smiled our distant smiles and found the wonder of a sweltering July night on a grassy hill under a charcoal sky above a red clay truck beside a moonglow night. Sorry, the headphones started sliding.
No.
Okay. Do you want me to read another one?
That would be wonderful. Thank you. And
okay. This one's also in my book. See, for years I had no thoughts, barely thoughts of getting published, much less of getting a book. So I saved these all up. This is based upon a mountain experience. We went to the Franklin family reunion. You may have heard of the Franklin Free States, a mountain story. A famous duo, Lulabelle and Scotty, sang at the Grand Ole Opry for years and years. And they retired to Spruce Pine, where Scotty died and Lulabelle was left by herself. And she sang at the Franklin reunion. Lulabelle sings Amazing Grace without Scotty's harmony to soften the sound, and without his rhythm guitar to hold it steady. So she sang slow and loud with jarred edges, like rusty cast iron without the oil of kitchen comfort, like strong rusted bells out in the pasture, singing and singing to the bending grass. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. I had read that poem, but not in the context of what you just gave us, the background. That's really something. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bart, you're up on deck next, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to read a poem. It's in my book, Tilted World. But actually, this is an early poem. I wrote this probably 82, 83. It was in my first chapbook, published in 89. And it was originally published in the Millhunk Herald that I had talked about earlier. So we'll start with this. And this is about when the factories, the mills, they were all closing down. I was witnessing a way of life passing. And my father, my uncles, my friends' fathers all worked in these places. And these guys knew that the end was coming, but they were still going to work. They were still on their feet. And I kind of looked at them as old fighters. So I used the old fighting term, standing 8 count, where they were kind of out on their feet, but they were still there. Okay? So this poem is called Standing 8 Count. Here he comes, climbing the countless city steps, dragging his feet along the crumbling concrete, head bowed yet proud, like a wounded warrior who refuses to be carried home on his shield. I watch him from the kitchen window, shopping bag stuffed with soiled work clothes, hair slicked back with grease and sweat, battered lunch pail underneath one arm. And from here, I can almost smell the 3 after-work beers on his breath. After 26 years, this homeward path has grown familiar to his aching feet. But today he bears a new burden. As he enters through the back door, my eyes meet his. Sad and heavy, I know their message without words. Another furnace down, another layoff, another knockout punch, fielded by an aging champion.
Amazing imagery.
Thank you.
Do you have another one for us?
Yeah, this one's not as old, maybe less than 10 years. My dad passed, I can't even remember, it was less than 10 years ago, but I'll stick with another dad poem, but this kind of wraps it up. That was one part of it when he was in his late 40s, but this is when he was in his 80s and he was bedridden and dying in a personal care home, and he was demented. This is called Dad These Days. Curled like a question mark, a life outlives itself. We watch Jeopardy. I feed him what they bring. Blue-eyed bone confusion, rattling the halls. I walk away. He calls for God. The elevator smells like piss.
Yeah. Thank you. I just visited an elderly relative in a facility, and you captured that.
Yeah. I would always hear my dad as I was arriving. He was always calling for God.
Yeah. Thank you all. we're going to go on to our next question. And if I can see if I can pull this up real quickly. Poetry readings, the writing process. So indulge us a little bit and tell us a little bit, if you don't mind. And we'll start with Bart, since you're currently queued up.
Okay.
How you find the writing process? Is it something that, you know, you live and breathe? It's easy, the words just turn, or do you sometimes feel like that writing process is more like delivering triplets breach?
It's both. It can be both. I find it. I read once where Joseph Conrad really struggled with writing. He hated it, and it was very difficult for him. Yet he produced some magnificent work. But I don't necessarily hate it. But at the same time, I have a strange writing process. I will write poems in my head as I walk my dog, and then I'm stuck with. I don't carry a notebook, so I have to keep repeating the lines in my head, so I have it memorized by the time I get home and I write it down. I also write. I actually write with the television on. I use it as like white noise and sort of background, but occasionally I'll actually pick a line out of something on the television, the dialogue or something. I'm like, whoa, and I write that line down, and then I can just go with it. And there are times where I've gotten an entire found poem, you know, in that process, just by listening about what was being said on television. But I write longhand, I write in a journal. I don't have any kind of writing, you know, like a discipline, or I'm going to write today and this is my writing time. I just write it down, and then if I like something, eventually I transcribe it. I have become more and more minimalist as I've gone on. So I will write a lot. I always remember that, you know, you have the writer in you, and then you have the editor. And when the writer's writing, let the writer write. And then when the writing's done, let the editor go in and edit. And that's what I'll do. And I go in, and it's almost like a sculptor. I'll go in there and I kind of chip away till I have what I want. And it's like, yes, this is the poem it was meant to be. Sometimes it's only 3 lines. You know, I might start with, you know, 20 some lines, and then I'll say, this is the poem, these 3 lines, this is the poem. So that's kind of my process. It's not very formal. It's not very disciplined. And I can go, you know, weeks without writing. And I always do have a fear. Sometimes I'll write something good, and then a couple of days later, I'll have this fear that that's the last good thing you're ever going to write.
Oh, wow. And
then later on, I'll surprise myself and write something else. And I was like, oh, well, maybe you're not done quite yet.
You know, thank you for that. I'm going to let Joyce jump in, because it's kind of funny. I noticed that she was kind of nodding in agreement quite a bit.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about your process?
Absolutely. Whenever Bart said that, expressed that feeling of, well, maybe you're not done quite yet. I've been through that many times because I don't go in and sit down every day and write in spite of lack of thought. I have to, something has to trigger it, but I do keep a comp book handy. And so if I happen to think of something or see something in the yard or have a conversation, I'll jot down one word, and then I will, like right now, my word is tomato, but I'm going to write a tomato poem, but I want it to be something more than just mayonnaise, you know. So I'll jot down little thoughts and maybe even look up and see what I can learn about tomato. So I acquire all these little illegible scribblings and then turn them into sort of clusters of words, and then finally type them up. That is, you know, use a computer, and then edit. Mainly take it out. Sometimes it's an add in, but mostly it's, I agree again with Bart about let yourself go when you first write. It's much easier to take it out than it is to think about, oh, that might have been a good line if I had just kept it, or I had written it down. So I think we're very similar maybe in our processes.
Thank you. Kyra, if you unmute, we're going to have you next. If you can tell us a little bit about your process.
Yes, so I still write things on the back of grocery lists.
Good.
Ideas come to me all the time, particularly when I'm doing something else, when I'm walking, when I'm working, when I have a big fight with my family. Writing is therapy for me. Second Life was written in response to a big fight with my current husband, my second husband in my second life here in North Carolina. And I wrote it, I don't even know, on the back of something and read it to him. And then I type them into Google Docs, which I love because I can edit it on my phone, or if I'm working at the Western Piedmont Community College in the testing room and there's no testers, I can jump on and edit. I do a lot of writing in the middle of everything. But the editing I like to do, if possible, when things are quiet. And I love the Google Docs because if I take out stuff, I can go back to earlier versions and refresh and restore if I take out too much, which I do sometimes. And for many years, of course, a lot of my writing was just oral. As Bart was, no, who was saying it? Yes, Bart, you were saying it, that you get this line and you just repeat it to yourself. I, do a lot of that. And I sing to myself. And when I'm walking, like in the Greenway in Morganton, if you're next to me, you're going to hear me muttering poetry. I am fortunate that I have a group of people, friends who write poetry, who I've met since moving here to Morganton, and the wildebeests, at least one of whom I see there today. And we read each other's work on a regular basis. We read out loud to each other. And my husband reads everything I write. And even my children, I have teenagers, and a 21-year-old will help me.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we'll do this lightning round. We'll just ask the three of you briefly. Do you show your work to others? And do you rely on them for notes and feedback, and or not? Do you prefer to just show it to them when it's in a collection? How about you, Joyce?
Yes, I do. Oops, am I muted?
Nope, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Yes, I do, but I've been slow to come to that. My isolation was born in shame, of course, that whatever I wrote probably would be received with scorn, but I have come to realize the importance of having other readers. And they don't even have to be other readers. They can just be good readers. My hubby is my go-to handy guy for that. And we have an occasional group, as Kyra does. I think that's very important. I wish we had more regular groups, but I take advantage of any opportunity to go to, like I go to Wild Acres because you get merciless criticism there, and I love it. I think the more you can do of that. The other thing I do is put it up and let time pass so that I can see it more objectively. Even so, sometimes, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, Bart, what would you say that you do when you with your work? Do you share it? Do you not?
Very rarely. The only way I might share it is, they're all different poetry groups that I belong to online, and I will occasionally post a poem there, but not as frequently as I used to, because I've kind of gotten tired of that scene. So usually maybe if I'm together with another writer friend or something, we want to share a little work, but otherwise, no, I just kind of, I write it, I do it, and it's mine until I decide to get it out there, and if it gets published.
Cool. And Kyra, you kind of mentioned that you read your poems to your husband, you read it to other poets in the area. Anything you want to add to that?
So most of my poetry is written to be read out loud. There are a few that work better on the page, so I have to read it out loud. Okay. Also, Adventure Bound Books, that sponsor the contest that I won, was having, before COVID, poetry gatherings. So I took advantage of that as well. But awesome. Yeah, I love, it's important for me to be able to say it and to share it, because poetry for me personally is about connection to the people in general, and also connection to myself. And it's become one of the major ways that I really connect deeply at an emotional level.
Yeah, it's funny. I just remember I met with Scott Owens the other night. Some of you may know Scott. And I liked what he said, unprompted. He's like, we don't write to be published or to get money. We write to share, to acknowledge, to get feedback. And that was really pretty much what you were saying. So I appreciate that. Guys, what we'll do now is let's do more on the poetry reading part. I have asked our poets to select, again, themed, but you don't have to stick to it, what would you say is the poem that reflects your full maturity, or where you felt your mastery was, you know, firmly established? I know that sounds very bravado. I apologize for that. But what poem sparks your, you know, your imagination when you think that way? What was my peak poem? We know that there's more. And we're going to start with Joyce.
Okay, I'd just like to mention one other thing. I think most poets benefit, and I have to be reminded, is if we read our work aloud, we can learn a lot about its merits and its flaws. And I hope this one, having said that, you'll probably think this is the worst poem I've ever heard written aloud. But this is what I would call one of my more mature poems. I wrote it during the pandemic, and it was during fig season, and it's fig season now. Yes. So here it comes. I'm like Kyra. There's so much right in the yard and right around us in the house to write about. This is called Figs, and I like it because it's childhood, it's the current situation I was in, and then it goes maybe to connect to other stuff. Other than that, Figs. After the neighbors died, we trespassed their holy ground, hovered among the fig trees near an empty bedroom window. We peered through glass at iron beds and danced among the figs, pulling nimble branches closer like partners in a waltz, reaching toward rich, dark fruit we plucked free from green stems. Wrapped within the ancient scroll of time, we cradled them in our laps like Cato, who caught fat figs within his gown so that the Senate might take notice. The leaves, palmate, fuzz tinged, brushed soft against our tender skin. We ate like Aesop's wicked servants, prepared to deny our sick, sweet feast. We knew only the fat brown turkey figs, not Pliny's 29 varieties from Cyprus and Mount Ida, Lydia, and African shores. Those warm and azure lands where even the slaves could feast, eat their fill, then lay ripe fruit in the sun for winter in numbers nearly beyond measure. Where gladiators stuffed sweet pink innards down their throat between final performances. We did battle with sticky wasps, gorging on moments of plenty. These days, we're lucky if the tree is spared by winter freeze, that bone chill wind that leaves limbs frozen and brittle, deadened to spring harvest. But this is a bountiful year. Tree drips with drooping fruit, the field is royal, figs' lush leavings brush against my arms, nimble limbs move to my touch, warm fuzzy leaves hold pleasure like tender hands, offer the globular fruit, purple skin, rosy lush tinge of sweet taste. I come with sugar and syrup and knife, slice away myth and mystery, slave of my own compulsion, spoon oval disc floating into jars, their rose wrinkled petals pressed against the glass, syrup sweet and pink, joy rich nectar, denying the paucity of last year's harvest. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing.
That was too long. I'm sorry.
No. That was wonderful. I appreciate that. Bart, we're going to have you come up next. If you wouldn't mind, share with us one of your poems that you think stands for you.
Okay, I'm going to share something. I wrote this last year. Actually, last year was a leap year, and I wrote this after February 29th, so it may have been on the first day of March. But there was a wonderful venue, a coffee shop right here near my house called the Coffee Buddha, and they would host all kinds of things. And they hosted my book launch for Tilted World in February. But at the end of the month, they closed. They were closing. It was right before the pandemic, but they closed for financial readings. So they had a big blowout there. They had a band, and we all brought our own drinks and such. And there was a young barista there that I had met, Megan Bell, that was became a very close friend of my wife and I. And I came home after drinking a 12-pack of Heineken, and I sat down and I wrote this poem for Megan. And about 5 or 6 weeks later, my wife suddenly died. So I was unaware of how much I was going to need friends as well as my own words actually to come back to comfort me, because this poem was essentially a poem about friendship. So this is called Carried Where We Go for Megan at the coffee booth. Beauty blossoms new each day if we fix our eyes to see it. Wisdom comes with age if we keep the door ajar. There will be pain, there will be loss. What we hold will shatter, but hearts bind in the dark. Love follows light. Friends are folks we didn't know, who arrive unexpected and never leave, carried where we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's very touching. Thank you, Bart. Kyra, you're up next, Missy. Let me put you up here.
Okay. I am so torn on what to read. And I also need to apologize that I'm going to read this one because it goes with what I'm feeling right now. My work is just so newly published. So home health is here with my mother-in-law right now, and the dog will bark. And this is not part of the poem, but my life is just very, very full. And this is something I wrote in November. An abundance of love. Or I should really call my mother back. Purchasing coffee in bulk, having 160 servings delivered to the house at a time, I notice, cup by cup, as it is consumed down to almost nothing. I can never buy enough, it seems. Who drinks all that fancy coffee, the kind that I special order for my husband and me? My children? My mother-in-law, who I know prefers a cheaper brand. Is someone just making it, rejecting it, and then throwing it away? Oh, the dishes in the sink tell a tale. I reorder. I can never buy enough, it seems. The more coffee I drink, having given up sugar so the flavor really matters more now, the more coffee I drink, the faster my mind wings beat. A moth drawn to the flame of scarcity, consumed, all-consuming. I can never be enough, it seems. What is the opposite of scarcity? What do I have in my life that cannot be consumed, that cannot be taken out from under me unexpectedly, unpredictedly, in this time of uncertainty, in this house crowded with family, all waiting for the end or some new beginning? What do I have? I have an abundance of love, brewed, sipped, savored, cup after cup in an endless pot.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I can't tell you how much I value, and I know everyone else here, the time that you guys have spent on these poems, we'll never know, but you bring to us such vivid images, all three of you. So again, we want to thank you for that. Let's go ahead and see what we have next here. And I know that we've got some more questions, but I think what I might do, and if it's okay with you guys, these are reflection-oriented questions that ask more or less about where things are now, the state of things now. And what I'm going to do is ask you each slightly different questions, just so that we can kind of go on and maybe also get back to some poetry. And the first question I'm going to pose to Kyra, since you're up on deck, and also it's probably a little more relevant. How much would you say the internet and social media has contributed to the well-being of poetry?
Well, the well-being of poetry, it's great. I have to be careful not to get a little obsessed on social media, looking at all these different poems. But young people can read poetry on the internet. And I love that. I love that also as a storyteller, I appreciate that things that are the written word or the oral tradition are now accessible to so many different people.
Yeah, one of my favorite poems happens to be Matthew Arnold. I'm old school English major. But you know, the funny thing is, back in the day, if I wanted to look up Dover, Cliffs of Dover, I would actually have to go to the library or go through my mom's collections. Now I could look it up on my phone. You know, Beowulf, I got that. Yeah, it's amazing when you think about it. What is at our disposal?
I actually want to do a second to the question. It is also a double-edged sword.
Mm.
Because it's hard in this day and age to be in the moment. And for me personally, poetry comes from the moment. So I have to be careful to balance looking at all the amazing stuff that I can pull up in an instant with going to my backyard, looking what the cat is up to, feeling things. So it's wonderful for reading and encountering poetry, not necessarily so great for writing it.
Interesting. Well put. Joyce, I'm going to ask you a question since you come from the background as an instructor. And again, we know that this is all subjective, but as a former professor, probably a little more objective. What would you say poorly written poems and well-written poems have in common? When you see someone else's poetry, or you're looking at some of your poems in the early phase, what do you consider, this is poorly crafted? What are some of the things you look at?
At my poems in the early stage?
No, you know, in general, what would you consider? And I'm just kind of,
I'm sorry, a good poem.
I'm making this broad, but what makes a bad poem?
Okay, well, I think what makes a good poem, and I am a product of the modernist. So I believe in imagery, imagery, imagery. And I notice both of my fellow poets here also, they don't necessarily attest to it, but their work attests to their strength in their imagery. What makes a bad poem is the poet who thinks that he or she is wise and can preach to us, and we can all benefit from his words of wisdom, and he fills his work with abstractions. I think, to me, one of my great favorite poets also is Gerard Manley Hopkins. Now, he was a Christian poet, but he doesn't offer platitudes. He offers the real thing, and he offers it through strong images, and you know how his faith was real and how it hurt. Whereas the Hallmark stuff, you read it, you're pleased that your beloved sent you a card, or your friend, and you say, yay, but there's nothing there to remember. What you remember is the good deed, not the word itself. Mm-hmm. So I don't, you know, I look for words that end in T-I-O-N. They're often abstract words, and I try to get rid of them.
Good. Now, those are some really good points. I know as I read poems, I'm either moved or I'm transported. And on those occasions when I read a poem and I start thinking about my Aldi grocery list, I know there's an issue. So just leave it at that. Bart, you're up next. I'm going to ask you a question. So after this, we can go on to reading a little more poetry. But could you tell me about, especially as I read your poems, the accessibility of meaning? When people read your poems, do you expect them to, you know, work for it? And I've had to do that to solve what's going on here. Or do you think that poetry is something that should be laid out and easy?
No, not necessarily. And you know, I'm not sure if I'm trying to make people work for it. Sometimes I have to work for it because I don't know what I mean. I mean, I sometimes string some words together and like the way they sound. I like the imagery. It's almost like a word collage or an abstract painting. It doesn't necessarily tell a narrative. It tells a story in a different way. It tells it through images, impressions, and different readers might have different interpretations what those impressions mean. But a lot of my work is not really narrative that tells a direct story. It does use a lot of images and such. So sometimes you might have to work for the meaning, but I don't intentionally write that, to be complicated. I just put it out there, and a lot of my writing just starts with the first line, and then lines start to string together we see where that goes. And if I like the way it looks, like the way it sounds, there's the poem.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know what? We have time for some more poems, and we always want to fit that in. So at this point, we're asking our poets to take their pick. The poem that you like to read or folks like to hear. And since you're up on screen, Bart, let's have you go first.
All right, this is a newer poem. I wrote this, as part of like grieving my wife. And this is called The Color of Absence. The color of passion, the color of blood, the color of penance. The color of iron when malleable. The color of a bruise that's almost pretty. The color of absence. The color of wings clipped too young. The color of dreams where we touch and you're still here. Impossible color.
Thank you. Thank you. Kyra, we're going to have you up next. If you can read us what your poetry pick is.
So I'm going to read one called Held in the Lap of These Mountains, which I wrote after driving back and forth to Asheville to go to massage school. And what I feel like when I'm driving through the mountains. And I grew up actually in what we call the Appalachian Mountains in the north. But it's the same mountain chain that becomes the Appalachian Mountains. And it's why I feel at home so far away from where I was raised. Held in the lap of these mountains. I could never be at home by the sea of water, sea of grass, sea of sand, my voice swallowed by the great expanse, hurricane vulnerable, storm tossed, with no protection from sun and wind, susceptible to being washed away by fickle moon tides. There is safety in the lap of these mountains. I drove the winding roads, clinging to her side, following the Appalachians south. I fled for miles upon miles, but I never left her lap. In the mountains, I am small, inconsequential. My failures and successes mean nothing. She loves all of her grandchildren the same. Layers etched against the sky, the horizon itself is curved by the rise of her hips and shoulders. The warm shawl of colors, soft wrinkled with age and hand-woven on some ancient loom, changes hue with the cycle of seasons as it flows across her curves. Her royalty is understood. No need to wear a crown. Even in darkness, I feel her generous embrace, calm, constant, comforting, never too tight. The mountains do not need me to be anything, anywhere, anyone, someone. The mountains just are.
Thank you. And as a mountain person, I that resonates. I appreciate that. Joyce, you're up next. And if you wouldn't mind, regale us with one of the poems that you enjoy, your poetry pick.
Okay, I did unmute myself. I was torn. Of course, my whole book is about a particular mountain place, North Cove Valley between Linville and Honeycutt Mountains. And so I have lots of mountain poems. I guess I'll use the title poem from that book, Standing on the Outcrop. And I begin it. This is a place that I love. My husband grew up here. We have property there on old family land. And we did a lot of research about events in that area. So it's a place that is deep in our hearts, both of our hearts. The poem is called Standing on the Outcrop. And it's a quote from Wilma Dykeman, who is a North Carolina native and amazing Appalachian writer herself. As we have misused our richest land, we have misused ourselves. As we have wasted our beautiful water, we have wasted ourselves. As we have diminished the lives of one whole segment of our people, we have diminished ourselves. Here the stories linger, nestled in old camp shacks dissolving into the earth, among rusting shovels and hoes. They're in a vine-strangled field of scrub pines and broom straw, where somebody's garden once grew in well-hoed rows. They stick in old yards where women worked string beans sitting on shaded front porches and men plowed dusty fields. They're hanging by the roadside where somebody drove an old Ford into Cox's Creek after too much shine. They linger in a caved-in hosiery mill. They're carried in the air like spring pollen. All you have to do is wait, listen in the breeze, feel the lives come and gone. Their legends are the landscape of a burnt-off mountain whose trees will rise again, whose histories are twisted pines clinging in the wind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joyce. Guys, at this point, I do want to kind of open this up to the floor. If the audience, people out there, if you have any questions for any of our poets, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, or put it in the chat. But this is an opportunity for folks to ask questions themselves. Anybody? Takers? Oh, nice comment from Chris. We appreciate you being here, Chris. Thank you. I will share one thing. As I read all three of your poetry collections, from drafts to final galleys to final punishment publication, it's been truly an honor to be able to get these words out to the public. And I'm very impressed with all the people that ask us how to buy them. As you can see above here, this is how you buy them if you're interested. But each one of these are like babies to us. So we do appreciate the time that you've put into it. And it is our honor, again, to bring your words to life. So thank you. Oh, Hilda, your title poem is now a part of my soul. That's to you, Joyce. I appreciate that. Tell you what, I have a poem. I'm going to put Bart on the spot. When I first picked up your manuscript, there was a poem that you had me at this one poem. If you don't mind reading it to me, because it's just my vanity. I met this poem. I don't have a page number, I apologize. But
I had, funny you said that, because I had actually queued that poem up in the book in case we had a chance to read another one.
When I fell onto that one, I sat down and read the entire book. Please regale us.
Yes, I like that. This is a personal favorite. I had fun writing this poem. I met this poem. She had good dope. I bought the beer. We started in, I wrote her down. She said I had her all wrong. We hit it harder. Nothing worked. Someone had to go. A man dies anyway, but the right poem is a shadow of forever.
Totally.
So thanks for asking for that one. I appreciate it.
Yep. And if we don't have other questions, can you foresee being able to do in-person readings in 2022? Joan, that's a really good question. Joan had asked about doing in-person readings. I know that some people are. I know she's scheduled to do one at a local bookstore in Morganton. Bart mentioned earlier, he's doing something outside of Pittsburgh. Joyce is already scheduled to do something, between now and at least the holidays. So Joan, things are happening. How about where you live, Joan? And I know you're out, and I think you're RTP, right? If you want to unmute.
I'm in Chapel Hill, or near Chapel Hill, and no in-person readings are taking place. I was co-hosting a reading series at Flyleaf Books, and no in-person events are taking place at all at Flyleaf Books. So we're not foreseeing, and I told Joyce this, we're not foreseeing doing any readings until next year. We'd love to start up the series again.
Yeah, I know Tasteful Beans is a local, the owner of Tasteful Beans in Hickory he heads up Poetry Hickory, a collective of poets. And he has permitted in-store live readings to happen. So I guess we all have to kind of hold our breath and cross our fingers and pray things going forward.
Tasteful Beans is a great place to read. I really enjoyed reading from my first book there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, August 10th, if I'm not mistaken, there's another reading, and I think Les is going to be this featured poet.
That's correct.
Yeah,
He's,
so we're excited.
He's August.
Yeah, he's August 10th, so we're excited about that. Kyra, if you wouldn't mind, since we have time, would you mind reading the poem that got you this lovely book? Just a little backstory. Kyra entered into a book contest with Adventure Bound Books, which is an independent bookstore in Morganton, North Carolina. And when she won, Redhawk Publication gave as a in-kind gift, whoever won the contest, we would simply do a chapbook. You know, no obligations to anything beyond just a little vanity piece for the author. But when we got her poem, her collection of poetry, Robert, our senior editor, who's here, he was so blown away by them. He's like, nah, we're going right to publication. This woman is a poet. So it stuck out to us. She meant a lot to us that she won this contest, and this book, she deserves this. Would you mind reading the poem that you won the contest for?
The Warmth of Neighborhood. On our front porch, I pause to breathe in the warmth of neighborhood. The Sunday solo of redemption soars from the parking lot as a little sister holds ribbons while a big sister brushes, releasing stray strands of long black hair to the birds. A football lobbed into 6-year-old hands wobbles and bounces around the corner. That wooden fence I had erected does not obscure the tang of lit charcoal or the memory of the neighbor grilling shirtless. A cat steals outside to lie in wait under parked cars, and my muzzle-blackened dog digs out a flower-bed tennis ball. The cruiser asleep on the lawn signals that the policeman is off for today. A mother and grown daughters in pink and purple sneakers chase each other for another lap around the block as lace curtains part across the street. Pollen-speckled water from a lovingly washed truck winds snake-like into our yard. The warm breeze tags along as the groceries and I head inside. Sometimes the days of ease give way, and the door is closed against the claws of fear, and the porch stands empty. Darkness descends and transforms into those nights when my purse is stolen from my unlocked car, when an unknown van slowing by our house makes my husband's heart race, when the ambulance flasher's sudden reflection is magnified in blackened windows, when a helicopter and a gunshot echo inside the city limits, when we do not feel safe enough to shake hands. Those nights will give rise to morning and bring walking dogs and Wednesday trash cans on the curb and Eugene's mail truck squeaking as it rounds the corner. We neighbors will wave and stop to chat and reintroduce ourselves. Someone will mount the steps to leave a gift on our front porch.
Thank you. Yeah, when I read that as your submission, I said to Robert, I don't know what anyone else wrote, but I don't think it matters. Praise. And Joyce, I'm not letting you get away. I have a poem, if you wouldn't mind humoring me and reading from your collection. The unique thing about Joyce's book is it taught me history in addition to warming my heart. when I started reading your poetry book, I realized this is true. This is geography, this is geology, this is history, this is sociology. And so I had to Google things after reading your poems because I didn't realize the things that happened in the mines. So one of the poems I really like, if you don't mind reading for us, is Recalling the Marion Strike of 1929.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and again, it was one of those things, you know, I'm from the Northeast, I'm from New Jersey.
Okay.
I didn't really know some of the unique history of some of the mountain area, and I didn't know anything about this. So you helped teach me.
Okay, I'm looking for it. Tell me again.
I want to say it's page 20.
Oh, I see it. Recalling the Marion Strike. I've got it now.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I wanted to get into all that history at this reading, but I wasn't sure I was going to have an opportunity. But I'm so glad. Let me just find it. Okay. I'm close. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Here we go.
Okay.
Okay. You ask a question about whether poets did research. A number of these poems came directly out of, we did research and presentations and little publications about some of these, the worker poems that are in here long before I decided to write about them. If you don't know, the textile strikes of North Carolina in 1929 were pretty horrible. The most famous one was in Gastonia, but Marion, the little foothills town of Marion, also suffered. What the sheriff did was to deputize a bunch of lugs, and they managed to shoot in the back 6 miners. So there's a picture of the coffins of those 6 dead, not miners, I'm sorry, textile workers. So much is talked about the miners, but it's the textile workers that get just as much. There's just as much horror there, though not the coal dust. This is about that strike. We interviewed an old man who was working and kept his job and clearly was on the side of the owners. Recalling the Marion Strike of 1929. The women were the worst, Mac said, his old voice quivering in bitter memory. They'd call you scab, yell suey, suey, suey in your face. Aunt Sally cried Mac, tears ponding round his eyes. She kept the factory going when the place was overrun with too much cloth and them wanting more pay. Nothing to do but close. They never stopped, marched, cooked the shabby meals, took turns tending babies, propped up plyboard homes when the mill owner kicked them out with their cook stoves and corn shuck mattresses. Nothing to do but fight for those kids in shanties, sating their gnawing guts with fatback and mush.
Thank you. And again, I think it was the imagery of your poem that, and many of the poems in here, it really is compelling.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know that we're finished in 1 minute, so I want to take this time to thank all 3 of our poets. Thank you so very, very much for being with us. And in lieu of not being able to do some in-person events, we feel that the Zoom kind of fits in. We get people from all across the country. We've had 2 people from California already that I know that were here. So again, we're blessed to be able to do the Zoom. We have no problems with them. And we thank you all for joining us. One thing I do want to point out, and just in passing, if anybody's interested, we do plan to put on an in-person workshop, a writer's workshop, and that'll be October 16th here in Hickory at Catawba Valley Community College. If you'd like more information on this, we encourage you to get back in touch with me. Presumably you've heard from me, so you already have my email address, but we do have Keith Flynn Charter Weeks will be birthing a book. This will ideally be their book launch at this particular workshop, in addition to many of the other authors that come from our stable. So we're very fortunate to be able to do that. And at this point, we're kind of over, guys. I want to thank you one more time for sharing your afternoon with us. It means a lot to all of us. And at this point, let me see if I can do one more thing here. I just want to thank you all. If there's anything that anybody else has as a question, hold on to it or send it to me and I'll make sure you get in touch with our authors, but we do thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. And Bart, Kyra, and Joyce, thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.